Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Julie Lapine, and I am the Manager of Community Relations at the Canadian Internet Registration Authority. So I want to thank you all who could join us here in Calgary and by webcast across Canada. We have an inspiring story to share with you this evening and a panel discussion on the digital divide in Canada. We are going to kick off tonight's presentation with an introduction from our President and CEO, Byron Holland.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon and this evening in Calgary. We really appreciate people coming out, our members coming out, and those who are soon-to-be members coming out to talking to us about what we think are the relevant issues of the day from an internet perspective and what you think are the relevant internet issues of the day. So my name is Byron Holland. I'm the President and CEO of CIRA. We have a number of staff members here that you can talk to as well about the things that we're up to and internet issues in general. You'll see them in the gray shirts. And we also have, I think, all of our board members here, CIRA's board members. We had a board meeting all day today, and they are here. And maybe I could just ask them to put their hands up. So you can see the folks in the room whose hands are up. They are the CIRA board members and responsible for the governance and oversight. Thank you, you can put them down. Usually they're telling me what to do, so it's good to be able to do that. Yeah. They're responsible for the governance and oversight of CIRA, so feel free to reach out to them, talk to them about either issues you want to surface with them or anything you want to ask about CIRA. So first off, this is a member event. So many of the people in this room are members of CIRA, and that's because we are a not-for-profit private corporation that's member-driven. So many people in here are members. Some people in here are not members. I welcome you to join CIRA as a member. It's free, easy to do, and allows you to participate in a number of activities that members get to do and also receive information about what's happening, what's hot in the internet, and a number of other features and functions. So feel free to sign up. You can do so outside if you're not yet a member. So what is CIRA? Many of you, I'm sure, know. If you're here, you probably know, but just to make sure. Most people know CIRA for .ca. We operate .ca on the internet. And what that means is essentially we're the ones who manufacture .ca domain names. We are the registry of .ca domain names. So when anybody gets one, essentially we're creating it and we're the registry that houses it in a safe, secure manner. That's what most people know us for. We also operate the underlying DNS infrastructure that supports .ca. So when you type in a .ca domain name into your web browser, and the one and only correct one gets returned to you, chapters.ca or whatever it is, that's because we are the authoritative router of that traffic, if you will. So we do all of that sort of baseline internet infrastructure stuff that supports .ca. But we do a bunch of other things too. One of the things, we're going to talk about it tonight, but that we also do is something called our Community Investment Program. And that's where we invest in worthy endeavors that help build and support the internet in Canada. So we have a granting program where we receive a number of applications every year, and we grant funds to organizations who are doing those kinds of things. All in not-for-profits. We're not a VC or anything like that. We're supporting community efforts. We also do some work in-house to help build the internet in Canada, like supporting IXPs, internet exchange points, like doing independent internet performance measurement tests, and not just speed, but also quality. So we do a number of things to help build and support the internet beyond just operating the .ca. In addition to that, and some of you were in the other session, I believe, on security-related products, we do sell and support a number of other security products, mostly in the, I'm going to call it enterprise infrastructure space, to help make organizations more secure. Some of you may have heard that there are some bad actors on the internet, and we help organizations prevent those bad actors from penetrating their environments. So those are sort of the main things that we do as CIRA, but like I say, most people know us for .ca. So tonight, we actually have a number of interesting speakers who are going to talk about some of these very issues. It's going to be focused primarily on the program that we run that helps benefit the internet in Canada. And in particular, we're going to be talking about some of the, I think, the germane issues of the day vis-a-vis the internet in Canada, which are around some of the issues around digital divides, around some of the gaps that we see in the infrastructure in Canada for the internet, and issues in and around that, which may pertain to access or digital literacy or just pure infrastructure. Now, all that said, Canada is actually quite a tech hub. Our organization is based primarily in Ottawa. We have a very strong and robust technology community and business ecosystem, technology business ecosystem in Ottawa. I know there's some definitely here, Vancouver, the Toronto-Waterloo corridor. And Canada has a long and strong history, in particular in the telecommunications space, the optical networking space. But nevertheless, in spite of all of that, there are still some material weak spots, some soft spots, the internet in Canada. And that's really some of the things that we're going to talk about this evening. And we're going to hear from some speakers who are really at the front line about what that really means at the leading edge of those challenges. And we've got some really, in particular, one really compelling story, but others as well. But before we get to that, I do want to make just a very short sales plug. We as CIRA launched a report today. It is literally hot off the press or hot off your screen, where we canvassed 70 grassroots organizations. Most of organizations that we'd worked with in some way, shape, or form had participated in this community investment program in some way, shape, or form, and are on the front lines of the internet in Canada. So we canvassed and surveyed them to get kind of their direct drive input onto how is the internet performing at the edge for these communities. In particular, rural and remote, but not just rural and remote, where we know there are challenges, but also urban, where there are still challenges at the edge or for the end user. So one of the reason I'm holding this card, you will see it on your table. It has the URL or the web address where you can go and check out the report for yourself. So literally hot off the press today. So we're going to this evening, we're going to do a few things. We're going to have a speaker talk about his particular experience. Then we're going to have a panel on infrastructure, innovation, and internet issues in Canada. And then, of course, we're going to have a bit of a social afterwards where we can all talk amongst ourselves about the issues of the day from an internet perspective. So the first speaker that I want to bring up is a gentleman named Bruce Buffalo from the Mamawapowin Technology Society. And he's got a great story. He's certainly endured some hardship of his own, and he's got a great story about how do you take an environment that really doesn't have access to the internet and take it from nothing to something, and his organization being able to provide internet access for free for his community. And we're going to do that. And then subsequently, we're going to do a panel interview with some different folks, both rural and remote-centric and urban-centric, about some of the real infrastructure issues that they see. So the first speaker, Bruce Buffalo, if I could welcome you up to the stage, is also going to be joined by Dr. Martha Menigray-Horses, who is going to do this kind of interview style with Bruce. So come on up, Martha, as well. And Martha's a consultant on Aboriginal affairs and a director for the Urutu Foundation. Martha, Bruce, over to you.
Well, given the fact that we are on Blackfoot Confederacy territory, I want to begin by greeting you in Blackfoot, Uki, and to acknowledge your background as a member of the Cree Nation, Dansi. So we have a number of questions to ask you, and I would like to begin by asking you, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you came to be interested in technology?
I didn't have a background in technology per se. I started out, taking carpenter training, trying to better my community and fix houses. That didn't last too long, but I was always technically inclined with computers and wireless, so it just kind of followed suit, and then I just figured. Listen. Hi, can you hear me now? Okay. Okay.
So I'm really interested in learning more about your background
Okay.
and how you became interested in technology.
I always had an aptitude for computers and taking things apart at home. So electronics was up my alley. I've always been somebody who could take something apart and put it back together easily. So it kind of was up my alley where I could, start a Wi-Fi network for the community because it was just kind of easy for me.
Mm-hmm. So I can see this little boy taking things apart and pulling them back together. Anyways, so can you tell us about the community of Musquatchie and the opportunities and the challenges?
The community of Musquatchie is essentially in between two fiber towns, but it has next to nothing for infrastructure for its actual community. The only infrastructure from the outside pointing in is incumbents. There is no on-reserve internet service provider except the in-house ones that are with the band. And there is no community infrastructure for band members or members just to use wireless or anything to connect.
That sounds very typical of a lot of our First Nations communities. Being a father yourself, can you speak to the conditions of the youth in Musquatchie?
80% of our population is, under 25, so we have a heavy youth population with a higher rate of unemployment, high school dropout, and there's no avenue or outlets for these youth to, express themselves, to use their creative, side. So a lot of them are bored, and you know what comes with boredom in a small community.
Mm-hmm. So why did you think internet connectivity is important, and why did you decide to take on bringing it to your community?
I've always lived in a big city, so I've had access to internet, so I've seen what internet infrastructure does for big cities and towns. And then going back to the reserve, there was absolutely nothing, so I just said, I can do this, and it's something I can do for the community that I should be good at, and I got it done.
So how did you do it?
I actually fundraised. I started out with $1,500, a switch and 2 access points, and grew it from there.
Mm-hmm. That's really, I'm just fascinated by the work that you've done. So have you noticed the impact of internet connectivity on your community members?
From my our initial run, it's too early to say, but from what we get from the community, everybody is very grateful for the service we provide. A lot of the community members can't even afford internet. It's either put food on your table or buy internet. So, I give them internet for free so they can put food on the table, essentially.
Wow. So have you had any support for your work?
Yes, I've had support from the University of Calgary, Nicole Rustad, my own family to help me support me while I've been on this journey.
So have you just rebranded the Muscatine Fiber to Mamawapowin, is it?
Mamawapowin?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Technology
Society.
Society. What does that mean?
That means the act of coming together in Cree.
Oh, wow. That's what that word means.
Yes.
Wow, I like that. I like that name. What are your goals for your society for the future?
We would like to provide the community with total access for everybody on the reserve. So that's pretty much end-to-end wireless coverage for the community. We have a business incubator center that we would like to start up and get young First Nations who are interested in what I did, and they can follow the steps that I've done to get where I've gotten.
So how do you plan to incorporate First Nations culture and values into your society?
We are actively working with the Musqueam Cultural College, and they've expressed interest in our project, and I like the digital literacy aspect of it. So we can, effectively work together with the college and, deal with that.
Wonderful. What are your biggest challenges right now for growing your society?
The truth, backhaul. We need backhaul to support our community members. We have a very small bandwidth pipe, and we need a lot more to actually service the whole community.
So there is a lot of interest in that challenge and work that the society will be facing
Yes,
with.
yes.
But I feel so encouraged by the work that you're doing, because I'll say that as I shared with you before, I spent a winter in the Western Arctic, and I know how much value that your work could be shared with other First Nations, especially in remote areas. I'm thinking about the needs of our elders that are in the remote areas. Many of them have to be sent medevac to the bigger centers for their medical care. And I liked what you shared with me before we got started. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, with remote, being remote, it's hard for a lot of people and elders to actually get around and be mobile. And then having a fiber infrastructure essentially is a mode of transit, right? They can get to health providers, healthcare nurses without actually having to leave their home, right? Or travel throughout the community if they have to go long distances. So, that fiber connection enables that virtual transport for a lot of these people who are walking, right?
That's right. And also, you mentioned something about with the young people. I'm really encouraged by the fact that you're are doing collaboration or thinking about doing collaboration with the Cultural College. And I see a lot of potential for that, for the advancement of cultural teachings and including language through the internet. So.
Yeah, it's really good. We want to explore the digital literacy side of it and expand on it as we grow.
Great. And then finally, one of my passions is working with the young people. And so I see a lot of potential for that as well. And the connection between within your community to find out what are the youth, what are they thinking about, what kind of projects would they like to do through the internet.
A lot of the youth I find are really adept with computers and electronics. They pick it up quickly, so anything to do with computers, internet, networking, it's, a lot of our community is always pushed toward oil and gas industry, social work, community stuff. Not really anything in toward IT or computers, so to say, right? So I feel a lot of our youth have that capability. They just need that avenue.
They certainly do. And I mentioned to you already that you have quite a following of young people, First Nations people. My daughter and my son-in-law already knew about your work before I did. But the interesting thing about it was that they were showing me your videotape on YouTube a year ago. And a year later, I'm saying, hey, you know what? Tune into YouTube. And they said, Mom, we did that already. You were watching Bruce on YouTube already. So I want to congratulate you on the work that you're doing. And I want to say thank you for doing this work, because it is much needed for all First Nations across this country. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much, Martha and Bruce. You can stay up on stage if you want. You can
Oh,
stay
okay.
up as well. You don't have to leave. Thank you. And so thank you so much for sharing your story. We're going to open the floor to questions, but before we do, I'd like to explain how we will accept questions this evening, both for Bruce and as well as the questions for our upcoming panel discussion. As you arrived today, you received a card with information on Social QA. It's an app where you choose the questions. So our guest joining us through webcast, all this information can be found in your confirmation email. And so questions will be chosen based on popularity. This puts you, the audience, in the driver's seat. So if you haven't started putting in your questions, please do so now. Okay. So, people are voting. This is great. First question, are you able to leverage SuperNet for backhaul service within your communities?
We have been working with CIRA. It just so happens that we, with our partnership with MCC, they use a different provider, and it is not the SuperNet, so we've chosen to go that route, but it is in the community and it is available. It just out of our price range,
Okay.
reach.
All right, another question. What's new coming down the pipeline in terms of .ca domains? Sorry. I'm sorry, I apologize. This would be more of a question for Byron, so we'll just hold on that. And certainly you can ask Byron afterwards while we're mingling after the event. So question for you, Bruce, is how is this funding on an ongoing basis? Is there a way in which we can support this?
We are in the process of going into a nonprofit, which should happen as soon as possible, and then that would be an avenue for donations to come through us.
Good. So obviously you need funding. Do you have a relationship with any of the big telcos like TELUS?
No.
No. Okay. How much backhaul do you need?
We would like a gig
Who would
and
be
more.
Okay, who would be your provider of choice?
Whoever would like to take the lead.
Okay. Good answer. And sorry, they're all popping in and moving around because people are voting, so I apologize if I'm delaying. Is this a common problem for local First Nation communities near connected cities? One more applicable to remote communities?
I say it's the same everywhere. A lot of First Nations communities, if they haven't set anything up through their band, they won't have anything in-house. It'll just be like from the outside in. So most of them are in the same boat we are, unless they've actually taken the initiative to set up their own community networks, like let's say Manitoba, where they're pushing fiber throughout their First Nations communities. Yeah, but for Alberta, there's nothing really like that.
Okay. How do you envision Mamawapowin, did I say it right?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Helping other First Nations?
We have, once we get our foundation built, I want to put up a template that any other First Nation can follow. And, if they want me to come out to the community and help them with whatever, I can do that too, just so I can help them, achieve what we have.
Okay. How do you manage to stay so motivated? What are some of your personal hurdles? Keeps you going?
When I go to the houses and the kids, they have internet access or the family has internet access, and I go there and they're just so grateful. So that really what drives me when I'm out installing. The people really appreciate it. So that's what I like.
I can imagine being connected, yes, when it's not something you have all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Another question, have any ISP organizations been willing to partner with you for last mile solutions? Has anybody approached you?
No.
No. Okay. How can this be scaled up so this idea could be applied across the country? Is there a plan for you to share with other First Nations some of the technology that you've put together and create some sort of instructions or package?
Yeah, we plan to do that. The equipment we use, I'm not trying to be a brand guy here, but it's Ubiquity and it's so easy. Like I learned on it and it's so easy to deploy, and then that's what we use in our community. It's really user friendly, and it's not that steep of a learning curve, but we do plan to make a template out for other First Nations to follow, and any use of the user-friendly software and equipment makes it easier to deploy out in the real world.
Okay. And so looking to the future.
Yeah.
Good. So we have time for one last question before we move to our panel discussion. So my last question to you, Bruce, is what's next? What do you need?
We need backhaul and then funding to make this happen.
Good. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We appreciate you coming to speak to our membership. And congratulations and best of luck.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. All right. I'd now like to invite Byron back to the stage as the moderator of our panel. I'd also like to introduce our panelists, starting with Shelley Robinson. Please join us. Shelley is the Executive Director of the National Capital FreeNet, a non-for-profit service provider and digital literacy organization in Ottawa. Shelley is also the co-founder of the upcoming Digital Access Day being held next week in Ottawa, Tuesday, which will bring together organizations and individuals passionate about Canada's internet to find solutions to the digital divide. Shelley will talk today about some of the challenges with access in an urban setting. Mitch Thomson, if you can join us as well. Mitch is the Executive Director of the Olds Institute of Community and Regional Development. The Olds, the Olds Connected Community Network is the first 100% community-owned fiber optic broadband network. Mitch will talk to us today about his experience in a rural community and the local innovation that has brought Canada's fastest internet to Olds, Alberta. And lastly, Jacques Latour, please join us. Yes, I'll give you some room. So Jacques is CIRA's Chief Technology Officer. In addition to providing his expertise in software development, IT operations, and cybersecurity for CIRA, Jacques is also an advocate for investment in Canada's internet, namely through the expansion of Internet Exchange Points, or IXPs. An IXP is a hub where content providers, internet service providers, governments, and businesses can connect to share data through a local traffic exchange. Jacques is currently supporting a project to bring an IXP to Iqaluit. Jacques will talk today about infrastructure-related solutions to Canada's digital divide. Now, before we begin, can each of you on the panel take a moment to introduce yourself further and tell the audience a little more about what you do and some of the biggest challenges, biggest gaps in Canada, are in Canada's internet from your perspective?
All right, so National Capital FreeNet started 26 years ago, so officially before the World Wide Web, and we started as a dial-up service. And so we were providing dial-up, but it was largely a community portal, and so people would dial up and then they would talk quite literally with their neighbors. And what's interesting, because we put together a book for our 25th anniversary, is a lot of the challenges were the same then as they are now. There was hate speech and surveillance and all kinds of issues, but there was also this digital literacy challenge. So we had 100,000 people who joined us in the first 4 years, and that was great, but some people weren't able to take advantage of that because even if they got technically online, they didn't know what to do when they got there. And so starting in 2005, I'm skipping away from 92 to 2005, we're a Bell reseller, so we sell DSL service. So we have about 3,300 subscribers. And what we found is we're really, every year, I think we're amping up our digital literacy because we have found increasingly that when you give someone a connection, it's really important, it's the first step, but you have to also make them or help them understand how to use it and feel safe online. And so that's our thing, is we want it to be affordable, we want it to be high quality, understand how to use it, and safe online. And that's my spiel.
Thank you. Jacques.
Hi, I'm Jacques Latour, I'm CTO. So at work, I'm in charge of mission critical infrastructure architecture, but that's day to day. The real fun part is building the Canadian internet. So over the last 8 years, I've traveled the country, talked to a bunch of people, and the biggest challenge we had about 7 years ago is that we didn't have an actual internet in Canada. So we were all using the infrastructure that's in the US. So all the traffic used to flow in New York, Chicago, Seattle. Those are the main Canadian cities for the internet. And over the last 7 years, we built more internet exchange point. Communities want to have more internet exchange point, and we've built those. And it made a difference in Canada that we actually have the internet in Canada today that can be leveraged across mainly south of the border, but we got a lot of work to bring it up, and our challenge is to make the internet available everywhere. An example of that is Iqaluit, our latest project. Everything is satellite uplink. There's a bunch of network in the city, but they don't interconnect. So a student that wants to send a paper at school, they got to go through satellite, up, down, go in the state, come back, up, down to the school. It's crazy. So we're trying to interconnect locally and bring content locally. And the content that we're looking at is critical services. The worst part is people don't patch their Windows operating system, Android, Apple, iPhone, because they can't. There's not enough bandwidth. And they're vulnerable to stupid worms and viruses that are 20 years old. So trying to bring the internet and critical services are the latest projects.
Ladies and gentlemen, in Olds, the community itself, I think the biggest challenge, and I'll start there, I think the biggest challenge that we have as Albertans and as Canadians across the country is we don't realize our potential. We don't know what we don't know, and we're not always willing to challenge ourselves or admit that. The community of Olds in 2005, 2006 thought we could just simply roll an extension cord out to the Alberta SuperNet and we'd all be connected and that would change our world. But really what we wanted to do is we wanted to differentiate ourselves and have the same opportunity as our urban neighbors did. small community at that point, about 6,600 people. So the biggest challenge that we've faced over the last 10, 12 years since identifying a dream or that goal of creating connectivity, world-class connectivity to our rural citizens was just, we didn't know what it would take. We didn't know what to do. And there wasn't a playbook. And as Canadians, I'd suggest that many of our governments haven't really had a strategy. You know, in rural spaces, we often believe that because we're rural, we should accept less. Well, as Canadians or Albertans or Calgarians or people from Maskwacis or Olds or wherever, there's no reason that you should accept anything less than your full potential. And so connectivity is an enabler, right? It is a differentiator, and it is something that makes things happen. In Olds, I have the opportunity to work with a bunch of mavericks. I'm not the guy that came up with the idea. I'm not the chief technologist that'll tell you what the DNS numbers are or where that signal goes. But I can tell you the difference it makes when a rural kid has a connectivity to solve a problem and look for information and has the same opportunity as their urban neighbor. I can tell you the difference that makes for communities and residents that want to access government services, for businesses that want to sell on a global stage. And so in the community of Olds, we took on the challenge of creating connectivity in the community. We created a fiber optic network that connects every home and business in the community. And when we were done that, we created a wireless overlay so that there was free internet access in our parks, playgrounds, commercial areas for the community. And I think that the challenge we have today is our governments don't understand the difference that can make, right? And we're just scratching the surface of our own potential.
Thank you very much. So who here knew that Olds had the fastest internet speed in Canada? All right. So, I didn't.
So I have, my neighbor is one of those foolish people. There's a few of them still in the community that don't have that connectivity. I subscribe to a gigabit of internet up and down in my home, but because my neighbor doesn't actually take his, there's not really a split, so my speeds are probably higher than that. We separate 2.4 gigs for every 2 homes that's what's separated.
Is
And
that enough?
That's up and down, and no, I don't think that's enough.
No?
If you read the CIRA reports, you know how quickly things are speeding up, right? So maybe today, but not in the future.
Wow.
So there's, just having listened to Bruce and having listened to these 3 stories, many of us who live in urban centers, we know these stories are out there, but to hear them firsthand, how you can go from no connectivity to one individual doing something on his own time out of his own motivation, bringing connectivity to an entire community, or what happened in Olds, or what happened with National Capital FreeNet back in the day and what they continue to do today, or even some of the stuff that CIRA is doing. And you can tell Jacques is not just our CTO, but our chief evangelist as well, both in Canada and around the world. And as we hear all of these stories, to some degree, and I think you talked a little bit about it, Shelley, what's old is new again, right? We continue to experience some of the same issues. Now, we've made a ton of progress since your organization started across Canada, but we still experience some of the same challenges. On the other hand, I would like to ask the panel, from their perspective, what are some of the emerging issues you see? I mean, a decade ago, maybe it was pure speed or pure connectivity in urban centers as well as rural centers. Affordability was issues. Sometimes they still are. What do you see those the emerging challenges for the internet and infrastructure in Canada?
For me, I'm going to say that one of the emerging issues is that governments, and I know that they're trying to, and at every level of government and businesses and And all of these parts of society assume that everyone has access to the internet, and we're designing services assuming that everyone has access to the internet. And so what's new is, 26 years ago it was a novelty, and now it's required, but there are still, CIRA's own report says that 62% of people in the lowest income quartile don't have access to the internet. And so that's, I'm doing quick math, I'm like 38%, there it is, of people who just can't access those services. And the other thing is we just assume that they can. So one of the things that we're talking about with Digital Access Day, which was funded by CIRA, is that we have all these hopes, these utopian hopes about how the internet can be a huge, leveler, and that's true, but that's only true when people actually are on. And so I just think that people are being left behind, and then it's the same folks who are already marginalized, and then it just gets worse and worse. Yeah.
Thanks. Mitch?
I'd say that we probably forget how big we are as a country. And because we have this sense that industry should take care of us, we allow them to do that. And the future could be friendly, but it's not friendly enough. And the reason it's not friendly enough is because we enable industry to go after that big shiny dollar. And they go after the big markets where they can serve. And they often have the opportunity to make great revenue there. But then we cause them to support the rural space. And in order to create competition, we go on a facility-based type of a model. So it makes sense in big centers to work on a facilities-based model. But in rural, if you have 5 networks built and none of them are really serving the whole, there's a whole bunch of pockets that just aren't being served because it doesn't make sense. There's billions of dollars spent, and we're just not doing it the right way.
Jacques?
The main challenge that we see in our work trying to build the core of the internet is incumbent, putting roadblocks all around the place, preventing cooperation. The biggest thing that's happening is that the price of transit is going down. Bringing the internet in Canada is causing that. And the big incumbents they're not really sure what to do with that. And they need to support, instead of trying to sell transit, which is 1992 business, they should focus on enabling connectivity in Canada, to do layer 2 transport, to help wireless ISPs to connect to internet exchange point and do more connectivity, instead of trying to control the market of transit and trying to make money on that. That's history. This game, the transit game is going to change. The connectivity game is what they need to work on to make a connected Canadian internet.
So the incumbents have an old line business of transit that clearly they don't want to cannibalize. What can we as a community do to help them get past that? Anybody on the?
I'm going to think about it. You guys go.
So my sense is we allow them to work on a scarcity model, right? It costs them very little more to provide us with a gigabit of internet than it does to offer us 100 megs. The challenge is we allow them to milk us and use their legacy equipment as long as they can. The scarcity model is I'm going to charge you for each and every little increment that you get, and we allow it to happen. If we caused our incumbents to share infrastructure and compete on service, there would be enough infrastructure in this country to serve everybody. But we don't. And because we don't, guys like Bruce have to struggle to try and make that happen for a community that's just as entitled as another. And at the end of the day, if we can start to compete on service levels versus who has the biggest piggy bank, or the biggest golden bridge, or the most towers, or the most transit infrastructure, the country will be served far better and we'll have more innovation.
So,
Yeah, go ahead. I've got one, but I'll go on.
so one of the challenge is it's the way all the provinces across Canada and the region, none of them operate the same way. They all have different infrastructure. They're all managed different ways. Even at the city, within the city owns the fiber, or the incumbents own the fiber, or it's free, like Montreal, you can do whatever you want there. You just sign a paper and the conduits are yours. Some have SuperNet. They have roads. The fiber road, like you said, the fiber. Bruce was saying that the fiber is an alternative method of transport. Well, we have more roads than we have fiber, so we need to be able to grow that and make it. But every province is different. That's a challenge. We need standardized, better access, better infrastructure.
And there's no national strategy.
Yeah.
Shelley, quick comment, and then we're going to
Yeah, I was
shift
just
gears.
going to say funding, because I feel like that always gets said, but let me make sure that it's on the table. There are parts of Ottawa that are technically within the city center, but there's not great fiber. And if they gave me money, I would invest to fiber because I don't have to worry about profit the same way that the incumbents do. And then those communities have fiber, and then I have more control over my network.
Okay. Shifting gears a bit, let's talk about digital skills and digital literacy. As time has moved on, and maybe I'll kick this off with you again, Shelley, what are you seeing now in terms of the gaps that we have in terms of digital skills or digital literacy in Canada? And maybe compare and contrast a little bit to what they were, just briefly, but what are they really today?
So I was thinking about this earlier. I feel like there's two sort of main areas. So there's the folks who I feel like are the ones we think of. So we have a project where we're teaching people digital literacy skills in the context of applying online for subsidies. So the Ontario Electricity Support Program for low-income folks. So I was teaching a woman who didn't know how to use a mouse and didn't know how to navigate online at all. So very, very basic skills. And then we have folks who, UX designers are making websites very easy to use. And I was thinking about this when Bruce was talking about how young people adapt really quickly. And I think that's true, but I worry about we're good at using the services, but we're not necessarily always aware of the implications of those services, especially with free services. So Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, and I worry about sort of, what are people trading or what are they doing without thinking about it because it's easy to use the product and not as easy to know about the implications.
Right.
Which for me is a form of digital literacy.
Kind of
Yeah.
the age-old, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Absolutely.
Making sure
Yeah.
people understand that.
Yeah.
Jacques, from your perspective, gaps in digital skills?
It's, so the focus I'm at, the gap I see are most business, enterprise, government, and to that extent, a lot of small ISPs, they don't know how the internet works. When they connect to the internet, they have their network, they draw two lines to a cloud, and they don't know what's inside the cloud. So the literacy of the cloud is like, how does BGP work, and what is peering, what is transit, how can you leverage an internet exchange point and connect to a tier 1 and have your better connectivity to the core internet. And so if you're in rural area, the only option would be you can buy transit from the local ISP, or you can build to the core of the internet and be directly connected. A lot of people don't understand that, so we need more knowledge on that. So.
That's quite a gap in terms of digital literacy.
mouse.
The difference is how to use the mouse and understanding BGP.
Well,
But
we've tried to educate ourselves as an ISP on those issues, and it's made a difference, which trickles down to our users.
right,
So,
and still literacy and ability gaps at all
So
levels.
we had that discussion, BGP stuff, you need to connect and all this.
Mitch, quickly, do you want to jump in there before we move on?
So I'd say we don't graduate enough people in the STEM side of things, right? The science, technologies, engineering, math. We have a ton of people in the humanities side, but we need to start teaching people how they can use the technology, right? And the internet isn't an enabler, it's an information source. And so for people to want to learn those skills, they got to know how to use it. And so I think it starts right at the early ages of education, and we could carry forward.
Yeah, as I'll use the moderator's prerogative just for a moment, because I would absolutely echo that as somebody who is responsible for a shop that is, generally speaking, full of technology folks. I'm not going to call it a crisis, but there's certainly a significant shortage of talent to do the things that we do. And I know in my peer group, certainly in the Ottawa technology ecosystem, but much broader than that. I mean, the war for talent is real. And especially on the networking side and the operations and the infrastructure side. I mean, people who actually understand that stuff and can act on it and operate it and deploy it and fix it and secure it are few and far between.
So
few and far between. I completely agree with you. So, you know, we've certainly talked about some challenges. We know there's challenges. You talked about your challenges. Are you seeing any developments, right? Where's the silver lining in this cloud? Are you seeing any developments or ideas that you're particularly optimistic about, or that you think can start to help bridge these gaps, be they literacy gaps or infrastructure gaps? Mitch?
I think our youth are growing up with it, right? Our kids are immersed in technology right from the start, so they expect it, and they hunger for it. Now, we have to teach them how to use it properly, but I think and truly believe that the future is bright just because they have access to so much more than we had, and that can't help but be a good thing.
Shelley?
So this is like not a totally great analogy, but there has been a real embracing of local. So people are super into craft beer and local. And so sometimes I like to joke that we sort of make, you know, handcrafted artisanal internet. And I think that's a version of what Bruce is doing. And I'm really heartened that, yeah, we've been around for 26 years, but you know, there was a real sort of like bright patch of free nets. We weren't the only one. And then it's sort of, and now you can see they're starting to sprout up again. And I think that speaks to people saying, we can do this on our own. Yeah.
And definitely, you know, as we go and interact with different internet communities across Canada, we're definitely seeing that more and more. I would absolutely echo it, whether it's the Olds example or the FreeNet example. You see this popping up all over the place, and whether it's a visionary individual or a visionary mayor in Stratford, Ontario, who says, you know, sort of the vision of, I'm not going to take it anymore, and does their own network in Stratford, Ontario, or Olds. There are a lot of these independent efforts coming up in the last few years. Jacques, last word on this one?
More internet exchange point to connect all these old school, crafty internet networks together and share traffic, and also have access to local content. So.
Absolutely.
Well, something we're working on. Moving on to the final question before we get to some crowdsourced questions. What do you see the community being able to do to help? What can individual Canadians do? We've heard some great individual stories, but as people in the thick of this day in and day out, what can individual Canadians do? What can our communities do? Shelley?
So two sides. Again, I'm obviously one of those people who likes dividing things into two. So I think it's really important to get the folks in STEM and the folks who are setting up the networks and volunteering with existing networks. And then I think it's really important to harness those humanities people to be policy people. So pay attention to what the CRTC is doing because they have a lot of influence in this space. Pay attention to municipalities. How can you make a space where community networks can grow and thrive? And that's not just technical. A lot of that is about, you know, laying a sort of policy framework and doing that work and advocacy and that, yeah.
Okay. Jacques?
So all the internet exchange points that were built in Canada were built by communities, not by CIRA. So what we do is we go in a community, there's a bunch of people. If we see there's people interested, there's a community, and they want to build it, we'll support them. And we need more of that. The more communities that get together, the more infrastructure that we build, the better connection we have. The internet is a network of network, and it's a connection of networks, and that happens locally. The more you connect locally, the better you have access to the connectivity and everything. And the local connection happens with communities that make it happen. If there's no community, the only one that will do it are the incumbent, and you have the internet that we had in the past, which sucks. It's true. I can show numbers.
Okay, you're not supposed to say that out loud, though, right? on a webcast. Okay, so we're going to move right along from Jacques then. Speaking truth to power. Mitch.
Okay. I think it's all about just being involved, right? I mean, we have to develop capacity in our communities. These networks don't just get built. There's a lot of education that goes into supporting network development, and we need to share openly and recognize that we'll all win as a country when we build capacity, share knowledge, and become better at competing globally. We have in the past ranked much higher than we are today because we were cutting edge. And in order to be cutting edge, we have to focus on it, and sharing information, building capacity is where it's at. So big kudos and applause for CIRA, because that's a big part of what you guys are doing.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, and certainly I believe that, we believe, not just me, that everybody at CIRA obviously has a profound belief in the power of the internet, but we also look at it's the infrastructure. It's like a foundation upon which you build the house. The house is really where the value is created, and that's where the apps are, or education is, or information, or whatever, social apps. If you don't have a strong, robust foundation, you can't build the value add on top. And we need that strong foundation. We shouldn't be making it as much about the competition at that layer as about creating the competition at the value add layer. And that's one of the, that's sort of what I'm hearing and distilling in the comments that you made. So I'm going to bring the panel side of this discussion to a close and ask you to ask your questions on the Social IQ app, which we used with Bruce and Dr. Martha earlier. So feel free to jump on and ask your questions. The first one right here, and actually I'll take the first stab at this. The question is there any support for legislation forcing the big ISPs in Canada to connect to IXPs in Canada, in particular the incumbents who seem to still backhaul to the US to exchange traffic? And the short answer to that is no. There is no, there's not really even, there's no talk of legislation or regulation to demand that incumbents or the majors peer at internet exchange points. So it's, Jacques and I in particular, and CIRA in general, have been on probably a 5 or 6 year journey evangelizing and helping community members catalyze the early stages of IXPs. And it really just has to be from the bully pulpit, such as we have, working with communities, influencing, educating, saying the same thing over and over and over again. And we're seeing traction. We're definitely seeing traction in communities start up, but at the legislative level, no. This is for all the panelists. Do you believe that Canada should define affordable, high-quality internet access as a basic human right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah?
There you have it. Okay.
Well, except it's 1 gig, right? Up,
1
down.
gig. I thought it was 5 meg. Yeah, okay. No. Okay, well, that answers that. Moving on, and as you vote, the questions rise up. So the more people vote for a given question, they float to the top, and those are the ones that I'll ask first. So the next question is, do you feel governmental subsidies and regulations help or hinder bridging Canada's digital divide?
So that's a great question that I'm going to start with.
Shelley?
So my background is in community radio, and community radio exists, and there's an amazing station here in Calgary, CJSW. So community radio exists because of regulation. And so I am pro-regulation. Not 100% all the way maybe, but in general, I think it's cutting out spaces for things that the market isn't accounting for. So I am big ups on regulation and making space and funding. So I also used to sit on the board of the Community Radio Fund of Canada, which was a funding mechanism mandated by the CRTC through which commercial broadcasters gave money because they were using public airwaves, and I am all about it. Now, there are times when I feel like we have to be careful about the ways we regulate. But I think that funding and regulation play an important part.
Mitch?
I think it comes down to how the policy is written. There are good and bad incentives, right? I don't think that any of us should expect the government of A, B, or C, or wherever to do it all for us, because essentially that comes out of our pocket. So we do need good policy that enables competition, creates innovation, but we don't want to expect a free ride because it doesn't exist. So there's a balance there.
Okay. Jacques, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so policy-wise, the only thing that comes to mind is for governments, when they procure IT services, that the policy says, you know, the transit you buy, the ISP should connect to an the ISP should connect to an internet exchange point, they should have IPv6, they should support NSEC, all the latest internet protocols. So we don't need to regulate that, but the policy should say you should use the latest and greatest of the internet.
Okay, on to the next question. Are community-owned co-ops a popular means to provide access to rural communities?
I think they're a
Mitch?
great model. They could be a great model.
Yep.
They're hard to incorporate, hard to run. It takes some knowledge and some capacity, but they're a beautiful model, and that's what our country was built on.
Do you have any sense of how many are out there at all? Or is that a
Not
piece of
nearly
research we should do?
Yeah, there's not a ton. Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting question to take away then. Next question is for Shelley. Should government be taking a large, okay, we've sort of answered this one.
Okay.
I'm going to move on from that. Mitch, what was the greatest barrier to the ONET rollout?
It was lack of experience, lack of knowledge, and lack of available knowledge. So we made a lot of mistakes because we just didn't know any different, and there wasn't anybody really in Canada at that point that had done it. I think we need to recognize that there are examples in Canada and the US that we can follow, and we shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. We went into our communities with D9 Cats and tried to build this small little network, and we learned that that wasn't the way to do it. We thought we would make money right from the get-go because everybody would just buy in, but we had to prove ourselves first. And so understanding that, it isn't just going to happen, that you have to persevere is the first part. So I guess there were many challenges that we learned from, I think, but the biggest win from a learning perspective was recognizing the value of your everyday citizens and of your leadership in your community. You have to have solid leaders if you're going to make things happen.
Thanks. So I'm going to do two more questions before we head to the social side of this event. So now is your time to vote and up whatever questions you want as the final two. All right. So, who, in capital letters, who needs to lead in closing the digital divide, and how?
Shelley?
We'll go with Mitch. We're gonna roll down the
That's good.
line, and
I like
Shelley's
that.
gonna
That's
get the final word on this question.
So who needs to lead the digital?
Mitch is leading, yes.
I think the leadership needs to come at the community level. In our space, there was $7.2 million a year that was leaving the community, going to incumbent pockets that could have stayed in the community to build the network. Now that we're doing that, there's about $5 million a year that's staying, and it's creating capacity. If you don't take leadership in your space, how can you expect anybody else to do it for you?
That's an interesting stat right there. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective. That's a really interesting stat in terms of also how do you continue to upgrade and invest in the network. Keep the money at home.
If you got a hole in your bucket, it doesn't work.
Jacques?
For building the core of the internet that we have today in the last 10 years, that was done by community members, people rolling up their sleeve and doing the work. It's not the work of the incumbent. It's all the little community that got together that built the network that we have today. So.
Shelley?
They stole my answer. So communities, I think the question, suggests that there is one organization or one person or one leader, and even in a given community, there's probably more than one person. I think we want everybody to be involved and to do it at a local level, but also then, as I said, to advocate, at the higher levels. Yeah.
So that's, in a sense, a perfect segue to our last question here, which is, Shelley said we need to get involved in policy in particular. but we could ask that question more generally. How do we get involved?
That is a good question. So one of the ways that people can get involved, I've just dipped my toe into this, but internet governance is both really fascinating and really kind of convoluted, but easy to get involved in. So there's Internet Society, there's Internet Society Canada chapter, there's ICANN, there's getting involved with CIRA, so there's all those kind of organizations, and then there's going to be local organizations in every community where people can get involved. And so in my organization, that means you can volunteer to be on the help desk, you can volunteer to be on the board, you can constantly, you know, try and engage with me about various things. Yeah.
Jacques?
Technically, well, what you said, plus technically there's all the different organizations, the OGs, the operations group, so the North American Operation Group, the NANOG, the MB NOG, all the provincial NOG, so those you can find them and join them and participate in their regular meetings.
Civic
Mitch.
Tech, sorry, can I just give one shout out? I don't know if there's a Calgary Civic Tech, but people could start one. And so this is a movement that's coming up where citizens just come together, some have tech skills, some don't, and then they kind of work together on projects that are tech related for civic good.
Okay, Mitch, final word on this.
Yeah, I think again, I'm pretty much on the local level. So I think if you take interest in the things that matter to you, you're gonna see that the internet is actually supporting a number of different industries, sectors of the society, and just recognizing that it can play a big role in moving things forward, taking an interest in those things and looking at possibilities with an open mind is really going to do it.
Okay, thank you very much, panelists. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Jacques. Thank you, Shelley. That was very interesting. I'd also like to say thank you to Bruce for a very compelling story. And thank you to everybody who's here tonight, members and soon-to-be members, for participating and asking a lot of good questions. I got a whole raft of them here we didn't get to, so let's get to them at the social part of our event, which starts now. Feel free to join us for the next little while. Talk to our board members, talk to our staff members, talk amongst yourselves. There are lots of great questions that are still here to be asked, discussed, and debated. So thank you very much, everybody, and please join us.